Right, so the Israeli legal system, especially when it comes to prosecuting Palestinians, well, who trust it to be fair and impartial in such cases as those then? Outside of the most extreme levels of Zionist dedication, I dare say most of us would have doubts about such matters. And this is no less true in regard to the assemblage of Israeli prosecutors, collectively called Team 710, who were put together specifically to prosecute all cases in regard to the Hamas incursion into Gaza on the night of October 7, 2023. But amongst all the biased claims, the propagandising, and the hype that Hamas were guilty of all manner of heinous crimes when they entered southern Israel and took hostages from the kibbutzim and the nearby Nova Music Festival, and despite the weight of evidence that Israel were warned ahead of time that Hamas were planning something, by the likes of Egypt as an example, it would appear one often made criminal claim has amounted to absolute zilch, with no evidence turning up and no claims whatsoever in relation to it being levied at Hamas by supposed Israeli victims, an admission that has come from a member of Team 710 itself, and which has been cited so often in media across the world that their coverage of events where Israel is concerned should be thrown into utter disarray as a result of this. Needless to say, therefore, this news is getting hardly any coverage in the mainstream media whatsoever because, God forbid, you know the truth. Right, so Israeli lies and deceit getting exposed by their own lawyers and the mainstream media, nowhere to be seen. Not colour me surprised, what's bloody new. This is especially nasty though, but it was one of the most depraved and wicked of crimes that was being widely spoken about by that same media in terms of being fact following the night of October 7th, and where that night is used as a starting point in so many media and political discourses, from Piers Morgan eternally starting from a point of condemnation of one side over the other, to demands that the UK government call a genocide and not keep hiding behind the events of October 7th as some kind of shield against everything Israel have done and continue to do since as somehow justified. This news blows apart so much of that, undermines it, and therefore it is critical it does get talked about. This story centres around an interview the Israeli news outlet Ynet did with a member of Team 710, the group of prosecutors brought together to examine the evidence taken from the night of October 7th, 710, and build cases against perpetrators, or alleged perpetrators. Team 710 consists of 4 lawyers, Asaf Bar Yosef, Mossad, Alex Dernbaum, and Mordechai Gaz, and it was with Gaz that Ynet conducted their interview. Gaz was working at the Southern District Attorney's Office just prior to the events of October 7th. She was finishing up there as it happens. She was planning to open her own practice, but like a good little Zionist, following the Hamas incursion, she instead wrote to the district attorney, told them she was making herself available in light of this criminal act, and she was there to do whatever was necessary. This is a woman who has gone on record as having said she wanted to see every single Palestinian who crossed the border wall into Israel stand trial and face the death penalty for their crime, and that despite being one of these 4 attorneys overseeing such cases, that she didn't have a drop of mercy in her for those who took hostages, and of course were subsequently accused of all manner of other heinous acts whilst they were in Israel, many of which have been debunked, of course, such as the beheading of Baby's story, but others have stuck around much more persistently, and therefore, when someone is clearly devoted to the genocidal apartheid state of Israel, as Mordechai Gaz clearly is, that they have now said in relation to another of these crimes that there is no evidence at all for prosecutions to be carried out in relation to such accusations, it arguably carries even more weight, because you get the impression if there was the slightest whiff of evidence or supported accusation against any Palestinian in relation to this at all, she would be all over it. The crimes in question relate to sexual assaults and rape, and this is a huge statement to have come out from an Israeli lawmaker, because it is one of the most often issued accusations levelled against Hamas during that raid they conducted on October 7th. And if that has just been debunked, as appears to be the case, then it hollows out pretty much every other accusation made against Hamas too easily spread amongst the mainstream media, save the fact they did, of course, take hostages, because this is empirically true, and that is a crime, and they are guilty of it. Aside from Ynet themselves who conducted the interview, the only other news source anywhere I've seen to have picked up on this story thus far and spelt out the ramifications of what Mordechai Gaz has admitted has been Squawkbox, who have, as ever, written an excellent article on this titled, "Breaking, Israeli Prosecutor Says State Has No Rape Cases Against Palestinians from 710 Raid." An excerpt reading, Gaz has admitted that despite having over 14 months to investigate the Israeli regime's claims of mass and systematic rape on the 7th of October 2023, her department has no evidence of any rapes or sexual assaults and is filing no cases for prosecution. In the end, we don't have any complainants. What was presented in the media compared to what will eventually come together will be entirely different. We approached women's rights organisations and asked for cooperation. They told us that no one had approached them. Gaz claims that this may be because rape victims were killed or are unwilling to come forward, but ignored the other more obvious conclusion, particularly since no one has approached women's rights organisations even confidentially. So conspicuous is the lack of evidence that Gaz advocates lowering legal standards for a conviction, because otherwise the prosecution will find it difficult. The conclusion ignored by Gaz fits far better with other available facts too. Israeli, UK, US and other international mainstream media and politicians shamelessly amplified Israeli atrocity propaganda claims of the use of rape as a weapon during the 7th of October raid in southern Israel. So entrenched was the propaganda that they even claimed that an investigation by 2 United Nations experts had confirmed the claims. But in fact, in March last year, the 2 women investigators published their findings that they had found zero evidence of rape or sexual assault, and that every claim Israel had made was either unverified or proven to be completely unfounded. The impression both the Squawk Box and Ynet articles gave me is one of Gaz being frustrated that the law in Israel is too stringent and the requirement for evidence too strong. That mere suspicion and hearsay and propaganda, especially when it comes to Palestinians, should be evidence enough. And she'd like to see the death penalty carried out against those accused on that flimsy basis. As genocidal as anyone in the regime is how she comes across. The burden of proof proving to be an annoyance rather than innocence until proven guilty. For the record, Israel has only ever carried out the death penalty twice, and one of those cases was overturned the year after execution due to the evidence proving to be scant. The only execution, therefore, carried out by Israel, its death penalty in their history, and upheld, was the execution of Adolf Eichmann in 1962 for having been one of the main organisers of the Holocaust. Crimes against humanity and the Jewish people on the scale of that. Moran Gaz would have you believe Hamas hostage takers are equal in terms to a monster like that, and whilst they are guilty of taking hostages, and absolutely that should be addressed, equivocating that to the Holocaust though? Well, I'm not Jewish. I couldn't begin to claim to know how offensive Jewish anti-Zionists might find such a correlation, but I can't imagine they'd be happy about it. Surely it just cheapens the Holocaust and the memory of all those killed in it to make such claims as that. Gaz, for the record, did admit that she thought it unlikely a filing for the death penalty would come. I can't say I'm surprised by that, but perhaps it's a good job she's not making that call either. The claims of such an awful crime are utterly unproven, therefore, evidenceless, baseless. Can we really trust Israeli investigation to provide substantiated evidence of anything else, or the mainstream media to even report on it impartially, as much as they are ignoring this course set of events completely? There were claims that Hamas were burning down buildings at one point, of course, before the evidence ended up pointing to tank strikes and helicopter strikes from Israel being responsible for those. That those who came in to take hostages were not armed with the means to do this anyway. Contrast that with claims also from Moran Gaz that it shouldn't matter what the reason was for people to enter Gaza, whether it was to kill or loot, but that they should still face the death penalty. Ynet quoted her in their article as saying, "Anyone who entered Israel from Gaza on October 7th to kill or to loot, it doesn't matter, should be included in the indictment and, as far as I'm concerned, receive the death penalty." Why? Because of those who didn't murder but looted, burned, stole, picked avocados, there's a crime, as some claim. Because of this mess, the IDF forces were unable to arrive in time. You came to the door with a drill and opened it to loot. Then a terrorist came in and murdered civilians there. From the state's perspective, it has to be everyone. It's quite the reach, isn't it? But again, if someone like this cites a lack of evidence for such a heavily propagandized alleged crime, it adds more weight to that as being true, not less. Israeli justification for the response to October 7th just got massively undermined yet again. Yet again, the world gets reminded that a truly independent investigation into the events of October 7th has to take place, as if there was any excusing what they've done in Gaza and beyond now to begin with. Meanwhile, compounding the failure of Israel in Gaza all the more, and certainly making them all the saltier as news like this comes from alternative media, carrying the can for the useless mainstream, is the fact Hamas have been rebuilding themselves to the extent that they've now resumed rocket fire on Israel, after Netanyahu brought down the latest round of ceasefire talks, and after they claimed that Hamas was a spent force. A ceasefire where Hamas were going to permit Israel to remain in their territory at that they knew he'd do this. A more dishonest priest broker you'd be hard-pressed to find, wouldn't you? But get all the details of Israel's failure in Gaza, despite the damage, death and destruction they brought north to south in the Strip. In this video recommendation here is your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to help support the channel and the work I do, as well as ensure you don't miss new daily content, which I know you would hate to miss. It's all hugely appreciated, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.